Welcome to tonight's Let's Talk session. I'm Jude Pemell, and I'd like to acknowledge that I speak from Aboriginal land, stolen Aboriginal land of the Cammeraygal people. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal people who may be with us. And so welcome to all of you. Tonight's topic is power. And so I'm going to just show you. Okay, so look, we tend to think of power has a lot of fairly specific connotations. And so I'd like you to think about what that word power conjures up for you. And, you know, if any images come up for you as well when this word power is mentioned. So, you know, please turn your camera on.
For me, power means strength.
Yes.
Yep.
Anything else?
Courage.
Yep.
Courage.
Yep. There's no right or wrong answer. It's personal. We all give it quite personal.
Energy, like positive energy.
Yeah.
Positive energy, Lydia, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what about you others? Hajamor?
I'll put the video
Leanne?
on.
Oh, can't
What was the
hear
question?
you. Leanne, can't hear you.
Oh, can't hear. What was the question? Oh,
What images
I can't
come to
hear.
mind?
can't hear. Oh, what images come to mind with power? With what?
Yeah.
With power.
Mm.
Abuse of power.
Is it a light switch?
Well, yeah. a light bulb. Yeah.
Actually, strength is the big one.
Mm-hmm. Big one for you, Ranjula.
Yes.
And so what images come to you around that?
Strength.
Yeah, but if visually, how do you see that?
Stuck with words here. Sorry. Lydia, Lynn, can you help?
Anybody else?
I'd say a fire.
Yeah.
You'd say fire.
Yes,
Yep.
fire and sun.
Right. Oh, good one. Yes.
Yeah, the sun. I was going to say the sun too. Like the vibration that sort of, you know, how the sun sparks out
Mm-hmm.
light,
Mm.
Okay. And strength.
force.
Strength, yeah, I was going to say strength and strength to influence.
Yep. Yes. Yes, absolutely. The ability to influence others.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It is a good one. Okay, so here are some rather common definitions of power. The ability or capacity to do something or act in a particular way, such as the power of speech. And so the synonyms there are ability, capability, potentiality, faculty, capacity, and the antonyms inability, incapacity. And another definition, the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behaviour of others or the course of events. For instance, a political process that offers people power over their own lives. Another definition, a person, organisation or country that has control over others. And another definition, power is the ability to influence or impose one's will upon others to control their actions, to get others to do something that they don't want to do or would not otherwise do. And I'm sure we can think of plenty of examples of that, can't we, Lydia?
Big time.
Sorry? Big time?
Big time.
What's an example you could come up with?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, being forced to get vaccinated. Big example.
I knew
Against
you'd say
my own. Yeah, I know, that's why you said
it. Yes, that is exactly correct. And so here we see power being used at a massive international level. Yeah. And there are actually various types of power. Of course, there's hard power, and that's deployed in the form of coercion. And so that's using force, the threat of force, economic sanctions or inducements for payment, in contrast to the coercive nature. Well, hard power also includes war, the use of militarisation and defence, etc. And so in contrast to that coercive nature of hard power, we also have soft power, which is about the use of positive attraction and persuasion to achieve foreign policy objectives, but also, corporations use soft power. And we see, companies like Google and Atlassian, and actually a lot of corporations having to use quite doing things they've never done before to attract people to work for them and come into the office. And so they provide cafes and bars and art classes and gyms and masseurs and really lovely meeting spaces and a whole different understanding of what being at the office means to attract really good people to work for them. And in this sort of post-COVID era, people don't really want, a lot of people actually don't want to go to the office or don't want to be there full time. They want to have a choice, and so a lot of companies have had to use soft power to persuade people to work for them and encourage people to actually go into the office by providing a very different kind of work scene and a work scenario, so that, as long as people get their work done or get the job done, it's not about, being at the office for all these hours, etc. And there's another kind of power, and we could call it subtle power. And so what I'm going to focus on tonight, because we all know about the others, is going to focus on this subtle power, as opposed to the more common understandings of power around force and coercion, and even around, the more persuasive soft powers. And, you could say that hard power can involve militarization and very radical coercive measures, and that soft power involves psychology and persuasion, use of persuasion and psychology, and whereas subtle power is something very different, something very, very different. And so what does that mean to you? Subtle power, spiritual or subtle power? What does it mean to you, Ranjula?
Okay, so this means that I'm giving my pure vibrations to others.
Yes.
And the other person is actually receiving it. Because if the energy is positive, the other person will definitely receive it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Lydia?
What comes to mind is something that you can't really see, that's you can feel, like God.
Mm-hmm.
That something that you sort of, you can't see it, but you know it's there, and you can feel it. You can feel the energy,
Mm-hmm.
the vibe.
You can connect with it.
Yes, but you can't
In
see
a subtle
it.
way, of course. Yes.
So it's the powerful energy.
And it's something that's experienced in a non-physical, non-psychological way. I mean, it is also experienced at those levels, but it is accessed through a subtle connection to that power, as opposed to a physical connection to that power. And so
I just had a comment. How about the ability to sense the non-obvious?
yes, absolutely correct. Good answer. And that's the power to intuit.
Yes, yeah.
And that is spiritual. Yeah, good point. Thank you. And so, we have the power of peace and the power of love, the power of truth. And these powers are the highest powers. And so we have the power of consciousness and the power of the collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so what would be your understanding of the power of consciousness and collective consciousness? Can you think
That
of
we
any?
are all connected.
Yes.
So it's through thought.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The group of people have the similar thought.
That's correct.
You power in that.
Absolutely.
And there's a connection.
And what is the connection?
The connection between the Supreme and us souls.
Yes, there's that. But between human beings, you know what connects us? Our feelings.
Yeah, that's a big one. Actually, Baba said yesterday.
Our feelings are what connect us. And our energy is what connects us.
Yeah.
Because we are energy and we have a vibrational frequency. And so we will feel most connected with people at a similar vibrational frequency to ourselves. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Big time.
Big time, yeah. And people, where there's a big difference in the vibrational frequency between the self and others or another, then there won't be that kind of such a powerful feeling of connection. The connection will always be there because energy connects with energy. But it's when we take into account the vibrational frequency of energy, you know, people vibrating at the same frequency are going to connect very easily. Whereas people who are at a quite a different vibrational frequency, the connection is absolutely there. And there's tremendous awareness, but there isn't that feeling of closeness or harmony or unity, etc. And so I'm going to introduce you to a man, an extraordinary medical scientist by the name of Dr. David Hawkins, who is also, as it happens, a PhD. And his work, he's written a number of books which are absolutely worth reading. And he did quite incredible work on states of mind or states of being. And so I'll just read you an experience he had as a kid. And he said, I'm just going to read it to you. So what he says is, in 1939, I was a paper boy in rural Wisconsin. And I had a 17-mile route. One dark winter's night, I was caught miles from home in a blizzard. The temperature was 20 degrees below zero, and my bicycle toppled over on an icy, snow-covered field. A fierce wind ripped out the newspapers that I carried in my handlebar basket, strewing them across the terrain. I broke into tears of frustration and exhaustion. My clothes were frozen stiff, and I was far away from home. To get out of the wind, I broke through the icy crust of a high snowbank and dug out a place to burrow into. The shivering stopped and was replaced by a delicious warmth, and then a state of peace beyond all description. This was accompanied by a suffusion of light and a presence of infinite love, which had no beginning and no end, and which was indistinguishable from my own essence. I became oblivious to the physical body and surroundings as my awareness fused with this all-present illuminated state. The mind grew silent. All thoughts stopped, and an infinite presence was all that was or could be, and it was beyond time or description. After what seemed like eons, I was drawn back to an awareness of someone shaking my knee, and my father's anxious face subsequently appeared. There was great reluctance to return to the body and all that entailed, but I loved my father dearly, and because of his anguish, I chose to do so. In a detached way, I sympathised with his fear of my death, but at the same time, the concept of death seemed absurd. This experience was never discussed with anyone. There was no context available with which to comprehend it. I had never heard of spiritual experiences other than those reported in the lives of the saints. But after this experience, the accepted reality of the world began to seem only provisional. Traditional religious teaching lost significance, and paradoxically, I became an agnostic. Compared to the light of divinity that I had felt bathing all existence, the God of traditional religion shone dully indeed. I had lost religion, but discovered spirituality. And he goes on to tell about when he was fighting in World War II. He was assigned to a hazardous duty on a minesweeper, and brushed with death constantly. But unlike his fellow crew members, he had no fear of death. It was as though death had lost its whatever power it had, its authenticity. And then after the war, he worked his way through medical school and trained as a psychoanalyst. His training psychoanalyst was also an agnostic, and they took a dim view of religion. The analysis went well, as did his career, and he became very successful. And he then goes on to say that he got a fatal illness, and this illness persisted. It was fatal, but he was able to recover. And he describes that the overall condition of his nervous system improved slowly, and then another phenomenon began. A sweet, delicious band of energy started to flow continuously up the spine and into the brain, where it created an intense sensation of continuous pleasure. Everything in life happened by synchronicity, evolving in perfect harmony, and the miraculous became commonplace. The origin of what the world would call miracles was the presence, not a personal self. What remained of the personal me was only a witness to these phenomena. The greater I, deeper than myself or its former thoughts, determined all that happened. This state had been reported by others, which led to my investigating spiritual teaching, including those of the Buddha, Wang Po and other enlightened sages, and more recent teachers than those, and including the Bhagavad Gita, all of which to him made complete sense. He saw everything and everyone in the world as luminous and exquisitely beautiful. All living things became radiant and expressed this radiance in stillness and splendour. It was apparent that all of mankind is actually motivated by inner love, but has simply become unaware of it. And most people live their lives as though they're sleepers unawakened to the perception of who they truly are. And everybody looked as though they were asleep, but were incredibly beautiful. I was in love with everyone. And so he was a very deep meditator. And he spent years in an inner silence, and the strength of his presence grew. He says, I had no personal life, and my personal will no longer existed. I was an instrument of the infinite presence, and I went about and did as this presence willed. People felt an extraordinary peace in the aura of that presence. Seekers sought answers from me, but there was no individual as David any longer. And so what these people were doing was finessing answers from their own selves, which were no different from mine. As I looked at each person, myself shone forth in their eyes. The miraculous happened beyond ordinary comprehension. Many chronic maladies from which I had suffered for years disappeared. My eyesight spontaneously normalised, and I no longer needed the bifocals I had worn for much of my life. Occasionally I would feel an exquisitely blissful energy and infinite love that would begin to radiate from my heart towards the scene of some calamity. And he goes on to describe a number of those, car accidents around the corner and things, And so he experienced profound changes of perception without warning. And he was a doctor, he was a healer. And so he began using the presence to heal. He says patients came to see him from every country in the world, and some were the most hopeless of the hopeless. And so a mute catatonic was brought to him, and a number of them were. And he looked at her and asked non-verbally, what do you want me to do with her, God? And he says, I then realised that I was just to love her, that was all. Her inner self shone through her eyes, and I connected with that loving essence. In that second, she was healed by her own recognition of who she really was. What happened to her mind or body didn't matter to her any longer. And this, in essence, happened with countless patients. And one day, a mute catatonic was brought into the hospital in a straitjacket with a severe neurological disorder. She was unable to stand, squirmed on the floor in spasms, her eyes rolling back in her head. And every treatment had been tried on her until the medical profession had given up, calling her situation hopeless. And he had that experience with her of connecting with her essence, and she spoke. She'd been mute, always been mute. And so he saw that all pain and suffering arises solely from the ego and not from God. This was a truth that I silently communicated to the minds of my patients. When I intuited this mental block in another mute catatonic who had not spoken in many years through my mind, I said to him, "You're blaming God for what your ego has done to you." He then jumped off the floor and began to talk, much to the shock of the nurse who witnessed the incident. And so I want to talk now about this man healed many, many people, thousands, and had to stop because of the number of people coming to him from all around the world. And so what he did, he then started experimenting with the energy levels or the vibrational frequency of our states. And you could call them essential states, or you could call them emotional state, you could call them experiential states of experience. And so let's begin with, at the bottom, with shame. And shame has the lowest vibration of all emotion. And it is said to be the state that is closest to death. And so shame is perilously proximate to death. And death may be chosen out of shame as conscious suicide, or more subtly elected by failure to take steps to prolong life. Death by avoidable accident, he says, is common here. And so then we have guilt. And so the energy field of guilt is a bit higher than shame. And what he says is that guilt domination results in a preoccupation with sin, an unforgiving emotional attitude frequently exploited by religious demagogues who use it for coercion and control. Such sin and salvation merchants, obsessed with punishment, are either acting out their own guilt or projecting it onto others. And as you can see, these are the lowest states of the experience of being. And I think I can safely say that they really destroy a person's ability to live fully. And so the next level is apathy at 50. And this level tends generally to be characterised by oppression. You know, our oppressed minority groups, and can be characterised by poverty, despair, and hopelessness. For these people, the world and the future look bleak. Pathos is the theme of life. Apathy is a state of helplessness. Its victims, needy in every way, lack not only resources, but the energy to avail themselves. what may be available. And unless external energy is supplied by caregivers, death through a kind of passive suicide can result. Without the will to live, the hopeless stare blankly, unresponsive to stimuli, until their eyes stop tracking and there isn't enough energy left to even swallow proffered food. And I know I've mentioned before that this was what I experienced in a lot of the people in our immigration detention centres when I was working with them. Once people went into apathy, it was basically not possible for us to bring them out of it whilst they were still in the detention centres. Very, very sad. And we see it in very oppressed people. We've seen it in our First Nations people, in those very oppressed remote communities where people living in such a terrible accommodation and without services and medical and so on and so forth. And so then the next level at 75 is grief. And this is the level of sadness, loss and dependency. And whilst we will, all of us, experience grief temporarily for periods of time, but the person who remains at this level can live a life of constant regret and depression. And it's a level of mourning, bereavement and remorse about the past. And it's also the level of people who experience habitual loss due to their own behaviour patterns. And I'm talking about people in addiction, chronic addiction, chronic gamblers, and people who accept failure as a part of themselves and a part of their lifestyle. And often that leads to the loss of their friends, loss of jobs, opportunity, loss of their money, their health, loss of everything, marriage, everything. And so at the level of 100, a lot more life energy is available. And so fear of danger is healthy. And fear runs our world, spurring on endless activity. Fear of, it doesn't matter what it is of, rejection, death, enemies, old age, social phobias and so forth. These can be very motivating. Fear can be very motivating. And that's why if you can get people out of apathy and get them into grief and then fear, they will actually start to get motivated. And so I'm just going to now move on to 200, which is the level of courage. And this is a turning point because it's the level of which power first appears. And as he says, when he tested subjects at all energy levels below 200, he found how weak they were. And from 200, an attainment of true power occurs. It's also the level of empowerment. And this is the zone of exploration, accomplishment, fortitude, and determination. At the lower levels, the world is seen as hopeless, sad, frightening, or frustrating. The level of courage, life suddenly is seen to be exciting, challenging, and stimulating. And so at the level of 200 people, at this level, will put back into the world as much energy as they take. But at lower levels, populations as well as individuals drain energy from the collective energy field and from society without reciprocating anything. And so, because accomplishments result in positive feedback, self-reward and esteem become progressively self-reinforcing. And this is where productivity begins. And so we have neutrality at the level of 250. And energy becomes very positive as we get to the level termed neutral, because it's epitomised by release from polarised positions, which tend to take place at the lower levels. And so the collective level of consciousness of mankind remained at 190 for many, many centuries, recent centuries, and curiously only jumped to its current level of 207 within the last decade. Now, I have to say he wrote this in 1995. So where it would be right now, I'm not sure. And so neutrality is the opposite of the polarised positions. So people of neutrality have a sense of well-being. The mark of this level is a confident capability to live in the world. It's a level of safety. People at this level are easy to get along with and safe to be around and associate with because they're not interested in conflict, competition, or guilt. They're comfortable and basically undisturbed emotionally. This attitude is non-judgmental and doesn't lead to any need to control other people's behaviours. Correspondingly, due to neutral people's value of freedom, they're very difficult to control. They won't have any of that. And so then we move on to willingness. And willingness is the gateway to the higher levels. Willingness is a very positive level of energy at 310 and may be seen as the gateway. So at the neutral level, jobs are done adequately, but at the level of willingness, work is done very well, and success in all endeavours is common. Growth is rapid. Willingness implies that the person has overcome inner resistance to life and is committed to participation. Below the 200 calibration, people tend to be closed-minded, but by level 310, a great opening occurs. At this level, people become genuinely friendly, social, and economic success seems to follow automatically. They're helpful to others and contribute to the good of society. They're also willing to face inner issues and don't have major learning blocks. So at this level, self-esteem is high and is reinforced by positive feedback from society, often in the form of recognition, appreciation, and reward. So willing people are responsive to the needs of others, and they're contributors to society. They're resilient, they can bounce back from adversity fairly quickly and learn from experience. They become self-correcting. Having let go of pride, they're willing to look at their defects and learn from others. At the level of willingness, people become excellent students. They're easily trainable and represent a considerable source of power for society. And then we move to acceptance. And at 350, this involves a major transformation. So at this level of awareness, there is the understanding that I am the source and creator of the experience of my own life. Taking such responsibility is distinctive of this degree of evolution, characterized by the capacity to live harmoniously with the forces of life. And so it's a massive jump from 200, where people are powerless and really see themselves as victims at the mercy of life. And this stems from a belief the source of one's happiness or the cause of one's problems is external to the self. It's out there. And so there's no responsibility is taken. It's a blaming stance, the victim blaming stance. And so acceptance is a huge turning point. This major transformation into taking responsibility for my own existence. And so we then move up to 400, which is reason. And this is where intelligence and rationality rise to the forefront, or when the emotionalism of the lower levels is transcended. And so knowledge and understanding here may be sought as capital. Understanding and information are the tools of accomplishment, which is the hallmark of the 400 level. This is the level of Nobel Prize winners, great statesmen, and Supreme Court justices. Einstein, Freud, and many of the other great thinkers of history calibrate here. It's at 400. And so the shortcomings of this level, though, involve the failure to clearly distinguish the difference between symbols and what they represent, and confusion between the objective and subjective worlds limits the understanding of causality. At this level, it's easy to lose sight of the forest for the trees, to become infatuated with concepts and theories and end up missing the essential point. Intellectualizing can become an end in itself. And reason is limited in that it doesn't afford the capacity for the discernment of essence or of the critical point of a complex issue. And so we move up there now to love. And so at 500, this level is characterized by the development of a love that is unconditional, unchanging, and permanent. It does not fluctuate. Its source is not dependent on external factors. Loving is a state of being. It's a forgiving, nurturing, and supportive way of relating to the world. Love is not intellectual. It doesn't proceed from the mind. It emanates from the heart. It has the capacity to lift others and accomplish great feats because of its purity of motive. And so now we move up to joy at 540. And so as love becomes more and more unconditional, it is experienced as an inner joy. And it arises from within each moment of existence, not from any other source. 540 is also the level of healing and of spiritually based self-help groups. Level 40 up is the domain of saints and advanced spiritual students and healers. A capacity for enormous patience and the persistence of a positive attitude in the face of prolonged adversity characterizes this energy field. The hallmark of this state is compassion. People who have attained this level have a notable effect on others. They're capable of a prolonged open visual gaze, which induces a state of love and peace. And so, peace at 600. This energy field is associated with the experience designated by such terms as transcendence, self-realization, and God consciousness. And you could, it is extremely rare, by the way. Only one in many, many millions. And so when this state is reached, the distinction between subject and object vanishes. And there is no specific sense of difference between self and other, or self and environment. And at this level, some become spiritual teachers and others work for the betterment anonymously, for the betterment of mankind. Some others become geniuses in their respective field and make a major contribution to society. They are saintly and may eventually be officially designated as such. But at this level, it has to be said that formal religion will have been transcended and replaced by the pure spirituality out of which all religion originates. And so now we move up to the Enlightenment, 700 to 1000. And this is the level of the great ones of history who originated the spiritual patterns that countless people have followed through the ages. All are associated with divinity, with which they're often identified. This is the level of powerful inspiration. These beings set in place attractor energy fields that influence all of mankind. And so you would put very few people that we know of at that level at the moment. So 85% of the human race calibrates below the critical level of 200, 85%. While the overall average level of human consciousness today is approximately 207. It is the power of the relatively few individuals near the top that counterbalances the weakness of the masses toward the bottom to achieve this overall average. So only 4% of the world's population calibrates at an energy field of 500 or above. 0.4 reach 540. 540 is joy. And a level of consciousness calibrating at 600, which is peace, or above, is reached by only 1 in hundreds of millions. At first glance, these figures may seem improbable, but there are many people living on whole 4 subcontinents experiencing famine and disease and just dealing with their survival needs. And they'd be calibrating at the level of apathy. So there's a massive difference there. Yeah. Sir Isaac Newton and Descartes calibrate at 499. And I just want to highlight that at the energy field of 600, which is peace, ordinary thought ceases. Beyond temporal linear process, existence is witnessed as knowingness and non-duality. And so this is peace beyond all understanding, or infinite unconditional love, all encompassing, all knowing, all present. So truly spiritual states can be said to appear at a calibrated level of about 500 love and continue on to infinity. Teachers who calibrate in the high 500s and 600s are frequently recognised as saints. And the 600s are frequently recognised, yes, as saints. Their state of consciousness described as sublime. And we know that these people have transcended their religion and are actually often seen as a threat by their religion. So attitudes, emotions, and behaviours characteristic of energy fields below 200 do in fact generally preclude any kind of spiritual experience. And so the classical chakra system, recognised by a number of spiritual disciplines, correlates almost exactly with the map of consciousness that has emerged from the studies of Dr. Hawkins. And the level of 600 corresponds to the crown chakra, 500 to the heart, 200 and up to the solar plexus, while the lower attitudes and emotions of spite, envy, resentment, and jealousy are associated with the spleen. The base chakra has to do with animal survival and the absorption with what prohibits spiritual progress. And so, thus, all spiritual teaching advise against worldliness, suggesting avoidance of attachment to sex or money, or almost anything else as well. The lower regions are also the centres of addictions, and one can be fixated at any of the lower levels. So, that's where we
Are
are.
we open for questions?
Yes.
All right, we'll go with the first one that I actually put very early in the piece. How can we get someone out of fear?
Sorry, what was that?
How can we get someone out of fear? Like a colleague
Counselling.
or a friend?
They need to see a professional. They need professional help. Ranjula.
Yeah, correct.
People in these lower states need trained professional help, or they need for a lot of conditions to change. And, you know, we witnessed some years ago when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, the referendum on same-sex marriage. And it was a very, very important social act of social empowerment, although the referendum itself and the conversation around it was horrific for people that identify as non-binary or as LGBTQIA, etc. It brought them up to the level of acceptance. And, you know, being accepted into the mainstream society so that you're not oppressed, you don't have a different set of rights and capacities and abilities, you know, that you can do what everybody else does. And the next big one for our society here in Australia, of course, will be the referendum for the recognition of our First Nations people at every level, and treaty, and etc., etc., etc. And these things are very, very, very important. And without which our society as a whole cannot move forward. And I think this makes it very, very obvious. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And so I have to tell you that the most advanced artificial intelligence machines in the world are unable to experience or feel joy or happiness. And they never will be able to, because you have to be a human soul. Force can bring satisfaction, but only power brings joy. Victory over others brings satisfaction, but victory over the self brings joy. And so these qualities, as we have just seen, can be accurately measured and calibrated. Morphogenic fields are not visible to the eye, but they exist. there is a visible and an invisible, also called the enfolded universe. And the enfolded universe is connected with human consciousness. Morphogenic fields are invisible organising patterns in consciousness. For instance, when, it was believed earlier on certainly in my lifetime I think it was in my lifetime, that no one could break the 4-minute mile. No runners, elite runners, could break the 4-minute mile. And Roger Bannister, who was an Englishman, decided that he could definitely break the 4-minute mile. So he stopped smoking for a bit, started training, and broke the 4-minute mile. After which, everyone started breaking the 4-minute mile because he had proved it was possible. And so what he did was open a new morphogenic field. It's a quantum physics terminology. And so morphogenic fields are invisible because they're energy. They're energy, and they're patterns, organising patterns in the energy of consciousness. And when a new morphogenic field opens, the energy shifts and the effects can create huge upheaval. For instance, the Me Too movement. When a certain number of women came forward, and it wasn't that many, it was first the report in the New Yorker, which involved, I think, 1 or 2 people, and then women, and then the New York Times had enough women, it was only a handful, come forward to report. Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement was launched. Then after that, almost 100 women came forward and said, Me Too, publicly. And so that gentleman is now spending 23 years of his life in jail. And so here's David Hawkins. We change the world not by what we say or do, but as a consequence of what we have become. And I think you'll all probably resonate very strongly with that statement. So, are there any other, before we finish? Oh my God, we have gone late, haven't we? Anyone needed to get a quick question in or say anything quickly?
Yeah, I've got one. So you mentioned about collective consciousness early in the presentation. Is there anything called as collective unconsciousness?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
what is the difference?
What is the difference? Well, the collective unconscious is made up of everything in all of us, all human beings, that is not conscious. So all of our past that is not in conscious memory, and as Jung would have termed the shadow parts of us that we keep under the rug of consciousness, all of that is there. And we see it expressed at interesting times. We saw it when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister here in Australia. This misogyny that leapt up like an absolute monster from the collective unconscious of people in Australia that just leapt up to attack her in the most misogynist, the misogyny that arose. And this was not a gendered thing. It was as much from women as it was from men, I think. But that is in the collective unconscious. And the only thing that really brought that out was having a woman prime minister who stood up to a very misogynist opposition leader who constantly attacked her. So, and that was an expression of a very vivid expression, vibrant expression of the collective unconscious being felt and expressed and heard and seen. So that's the collective unconscious. I mean, I'm not saying that it's all misogynist and horrible. There are many things in the collective unconsciousness. It's so much fear. That's why, our generally the world, social world, is governed by fear, which is why the vibration is so low. We live in a fear-driven world. And people have a lot of unconscious fear, which they do not acknowledge.
Yep, thank you. That's a big topic, so I don't think we can do justice in 2 minutes. So
It is a big topic, absolutely. So, look, I think it's late, so we'll have some meditation.
One more quick one, Jude.
Oh, okay, Ranjula.
Yes, energy connects to energy. So that's amazing because, really, if we have powerful energy, it actually gives out the vibrations and the atmosphere is transformed, right?
Mm.
Could you please little bit explain on that? Thank you.
Ooh, now that is a bit of a deep question, Ranjula.
Maybe we'll leave it for another week then.
Energy,
another time.
Yeah. Look, energy transforms energy. If I make the leap between being a victim and taking responsibility for my own situation, my own life, my own actions, my own existence, my energy field is going to take a high jump. I am going to take a high jump. It's a huge shift. And so it's like world transformation will happen, as we know, as I'm sure you all know, because a strategic number of people not only take responsibility for transforming themselves, take responsibility for their own existence, and thereby they transform themselves and really raise their vibration. But they also take responsibility for transforming the world. And this is how it happens. And when that strategic number of people achieves a high enough vibrational frequency, that, because energy connects with energy, that energy of that very small number of people when it attains a certain level, all energy will be transformed. That's how it works. It doesn't take many people.
And also we carry our energy with us.
Sorry, what was that?
We carry our energy and our vibrations with us.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
and this is why it's said that, the service to do service through the mind by bringing yourself, your vibrational frequency up into the frequency of love and those higher states, you know, from acceptance onward, you are serving the world. And because the vibrations that you're putting out come from the heart, and the vibrational frequency that comes from the heart is much higher and purer than the vibrational frequency that comes from the mind. And so, you know, at the calibration of 600, we cease to have the thoughts. We cease thinking about others. We cease having projections. You know, all that is finished. And I know in yesterday's morning's class, which some of you, if not all of you, heard, we heard that if you still think about others, can't remember the exact wording, but it's like if you're still thinking about others, you haven't achieved that deep level of purity of heart, something like that. So, is that a bit of an answer, Ranjula?
Excellent. Yes. Thank you. And yesterday, actually, Baba talked a lot about feelings, the 5 feelings.
Sorry, I
and
didn't catch that.
the feelings were about benevolence for others,
Yes.
giving love and cooperation, increasing zeal and enthusiasm,
Yes.
everyone belonging to you, and the
Mm.
most important one was soul consciousness.
It's correct.
Very nice.
So it all fits, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay, now we are going to have a short meditation. So the invitation is to just take a deep breath, relax if you're not already relaxed. And now move my awareness away from the thoughts, the senses. I'm instantly into that still, silent place inside. That very, very safe, protected place. I am moving to the light, to the light of understanding. This makes everything without irritation. And I experience a connection with my fellow travelers. as we move together. And the subtle realization of self, of God, and of divine, supersensuous joy and bliss. Hearts connected, as we all move forward together. One powerful, profound energy field, expanding and expanding. Embracing all souls with love and the inclusion as we connect to the source. Just filling the world with divine light, the higher realms of consciousness. Love. The beauty of this experience of each other. Shanti.